This is Metabolic Radio, the podcast dedicated to keeping you informed when it comes to everything fitness. My name is Taylor Empey, and with the help of my co-host Shane Pace, we aim to expose the truths about the health and fitness industry. The information and suggestions given in this podcast should not be considered as clinical or medical advice. Consult with a physician before implementing any information provided on this podcast. It's time. It's Q&A time. On Metabolic Radio.
Today?
Today.
Let's do it tomorrow.
No. Right now.
Well, in theory, it'd be a couple of days from now. Actually,
wait,
hold on. Am I wrong in this? But is this technically not in the future? Right now.
Right now is not in the future. Right now is right now.
Right now is in the future for us.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
No.
Because this is actually 2 days away.
No, it will be. It's literally happening right now, and it will be listened to in the future.
Oh, that's how that plays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, this isn't the time travel podcast.
This is the time travel room.
Really?
I'm thinking.
Anyway, let's time travel back to the present.
Yes, no doubt.
And talk about questions and answers from listeners like you. And I seriously want to steal the PBS slogan thing.
Of sorts.
Support for PBS is provided by viewers like you.
So we need support.
Yes.
Hey, that is a tie-in to what we just talked about.
Yes, it is. All right. We can talk about that later.
We will talk about it later.
All right.
That is humorous.
Now that the babbling is done.
Oh, no, we're not done.
We're not done. We're getting started.
It will continue. Our babbling will continue, people.
Yes. First question for today comes from our good friend Tammy. Should I do variations of exercises? And it was a longer question than this, but essentially what I think she's getting at is should she...
I haven't read this. Have I read this?
Nope. It was emailed to me this week.
Huh?
They don't like to email you. They like to email me. Well, actually, it's not that. It's that when they do the Q&A tab, it just goes to me.
I'll say you're a cheater. He cheats.
So what I think she's getting at here is talking about angles, positioning of the body, different stances, different grips, and different types or variations of a type of exercise. Like an example she used was doing different types of deadlifts, like RDLs.
Do we need to read the actual question if there's more to this, or do you have it down?
No, that was pretty much it.
Okay.
She's and because the second one is another question we're going to get to. So, is it important, and should she do them variations, or should she just stick with the same exercises?
Yes.
Elaborate.
What's your thought? Or do you want me to go first?
Well, it's up to you. I don't care.
I don't care either.
Okay. I'll go. It depends.
I usually let you go first anyway.
I would say that dang it, every time. I would say that when you're talking about well-rounded fitness, ranges of motion, development of muscle tissue, that a variety of exercises should be used. And I think that varying different types of exercises, let's say, for example, doing a sumo deadlift, a conventional deadlift, a Romanian deadlift, doing a more neutral stance squat, doing a wide stance squat, those kind of things, as long as it's sound for your biomechanics, it would be better than just sticking to one type of one exercise forever, because it could limit mobility. If you're wanting certain...
I think that's more range of motion.
You think so? Mm-hmm. What about strength within that range, though?
That's still about control. That being said, I don't want to... I'm already hitting like I'm saying no to what you're saying.
No, it's fine. I get what we're just having a conversation about it on both ends.
No, I agree. I think that let's take an example of a squat. Okay, so let's say you take a comfortable. Sorry,
you're good.
A comfortable stance, because I think that's the most important stance in squats. That you can do through the whole range of motion. You do the whole range of motion. You don't have to necessarily vary your foot placement.
So,
Though, I mean, don't get me wrong, there is reason, but
I guess
I'm saying is if you can do it controlled
Mm-hmm.
and you can get extremely full range of motion and do it controlled so you're not hurting your knees and go to the depth, I think you actually cover it all.
I think you're right for the vast majority of it. It's more of like a minute detail when
That's
you're
the
talking about
reason
playing
why-
with angles.
That's the reason why I'm kind of curious to know if there's more to this question.
And I don't mean to say, because I don't want people to think that there's such thing as spot treating. But when you're activating a
there
muscle,
is. There is.
let me elaborate. People think that when you work a specific spot on your body, that things like fat will burn from that area, and that's a whole other conversation.
That is another conversation.
That's
Maybe we
not
should-
what I wanted to say.
Yeah, but you probably should bring that up for 2 seconds and just start it.
So some people think that they think, okay, if I work this area, then it's going
It's
to
called spot reduction.
yeah, it's going to reduce body fat from that area, and that's not what she was saying.
No,
What she was
that's-
saying is, should I vary these exercises
Well, and
for muscle building
Cover
specifically?
that in real brief. That is not possible. It's not physiological possible without liposuction. I think we covered that once before this, but we'll just say that and then we'll go on to the next.
But on the other end of the spectrum, for muscle development, it is true because different angles will cause. Now, when you activate a group of muscles, like your quads, that's multiple muscles. That's not just one muscle.
I mean,
it's
four.
a group, right?
Yeah, quads
but
is
when
4.
you position the body in a different position in a squat, you're going to activate different muscle heads
Right.
within that. So that's where I would say that doing a variety of angles is still important.
Well, no, I'll give you that. So,
And-
understand where Taylor's going with this because I'm going to narrow in some stuff I think he's missed in his explanation because I get it and I want to make sure everybody else does. So let's take the bicep as an example. There's 2 actual connections on the upper part of the bicep. The superior is what it would be known as attachments. And there's only one on the bottom. On the bottom, you're not going to get different muscle recruitment patterns based on it. But with the upper one, depending on if you use rotation, you can actually hit the bicep differently. And so he's right on that on angles. So
Yeah,
I just wanted that.
That's a good
clarify
example because I don't even remember who was talking about this, but anyway, I was talking to somebody about this, or I was listening to something. But having like a fresh new client do multiple different angles, like having them do curls, from an inside angle, from an outside angle, having them do them with rotation, having do reverse curls, those kind of things.
I wouldn't do that
versus taking somebody. Why wouldn't you do that?
I wouldn't do that early.
Well, why?
Because you don't need to do it at that point. So let me
But,
tell you.
what they were saying was that you take somebody who's been lifting their whole life, and who's been doing, let's say they've been doing the same bicep curl for 10 years or whatever, or 20 years, and then you try to have them do different variations of curls. It's going to actually be harder and potentially more risky for them than
risky,
someone
yes,
starting
to an
out.
extent. And I was going to say the reason why I disagree with it at the beginning stages is because you don't have to nitpick. So understand
Because they're going to respond to pretty much what you give them.
anything you throw at them is going to be amazing response.
Yeah.
But so here's the other thing you got to understand though. When you start to change your angles, it's because you're having an inadequacy in how the reaction's happening. So with a beginner, you're not going to understand that as much.
I could see that, yeah.
So like let's talk. We're going to do this on the basis of people that understand this because I don't want to define the exercise in depth. But a dumbbell curl, okay? So you take a dumbbell curl and you do a normal alternating dumbbell curl. So it's turning out when you get to the top, right?
Oh, if you're doing the supination, the rotation.
Yes,
within
you're
there.
doing an
So
actual
you're
rotation.
starting with the dumbbell at your side in a hammer neutral position, and then as you bring it up, you rotate it 90 degrees.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so that's a normal. If you looked it up, if you looked up alternating dumbbell curls, that's what this is actually going to look like. That between that and the hammer curl, the way that it hits the bicep itself, but it'll hit the brachialis muscle
Yeah.
substantially.
Well, you can see that even just when you
with
rotate the
rotation.
wrist when your
Exactly
elbow's in a
right.
semi-flex
Right,
position.
and it'll change what you hit in your forearms. And so, is there a reason to do both of them? There is at a time when you first initially do it because of the nature of someone's motor reactions. They don't have the reaction, so all their muscles are going to incorporate. And so at the beginning stages, it's the value of doing angles is lessened.
I could see that because one of the wise protocols to follow when you're dealing with a new client that's never been introduced to resistance training is not necessarily doing this with weight training, but they talk about this in exercise therapy type certifications about moving progressively to more difficult things or more dynamic movements. So you would not necessarily start static, but you kind of on that spectrum, you start from something of that's less complex in terms of its dynamics and movement, and then move into something more progressive. So you're talking about, okay, we're just going to teach them a standard curl with dumbbell or barbell, and then we'll get into variations like reverse and supinating curls and those kind of things.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense.
The other side of that coin, though, too, is that's why you go with compound to begin with, because they hit a bigger majority of, especially beginning with, because they hit a bigger majority of muscle groups. And so when you're doing that, it's going to hit more angles and it's going to hit more, with just doing that to start with. As time goes on, you become better at the exercise, which negates out a lot of the control muscles. So you don't have to use them as much, which means you have less muscle recruitment, at which point your angles become more important. When other people have talked about this, in other podcasts that I listen to, because I listen to a lot of them, they bring up the fact that, you don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. It's less value, blah, 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 which I'm not saying they're wrong, but the reality is as time goes on and you do something, anything you do, you become better at. Okay, so let's break it down to something completely unrelated. Let's say you played a video game. You start off and you're playing a video game and you get crushed every time you play it. Okay, by whatever. I don't care if it's computer against people. As time goes on, progressively you'll improve on how you move. You'll have better hand-eye coordination.
Yeah.
You'll have better central nervous system reactions. And you'll get better and better and better, and so pretty soon they're not crushing you, and pretty soon you can actually turn around and be the guy crushing. And so it's the same concept, even in physical related stuff. The more you do stuff, the more your muscle recruitment.
It's proficiency.
Yes, proficiency.
And it's the balance of confidence and competence.
There is exactly truth.
Yeah.
Yes.
The more competent you become at something, the more confident you are, which means, again, that will translate to developing more competence in the future.
And it will just progressively increase. The thing with muscles, when you're doing it with muscles, is as you become more competent, as you put it, you have less muscle recruitment because you need less muscle recruitment to do the movement.
Say that one more time.
You lose muscle recruitment because you don't need to use as many muscles to do the activity.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Because it's a new level of homeostasis, essentially.
Yeah, to an extent,
your body's adapted to that.
You've adapted to it. It's not a new move. Your body's not trying to figure out how to do the movement. And because of it, angles become more important. As do stances, grips, and body positions. In fact, almost all that.
Yeah. The one last thing on this that I want to bring up was,
I'm not saying we're even close to answering it, but that's to start with.
No, but I mean, I know a couple former Mr. Utahs, and they both advocate hitting the muscle from every angle possible. Now, their approach, I assume, is because they want maximum muscle development out of that group for an aesthetic purpose. What are your thoughts on that?
See, and I think it's training. I think they've been trained to do that. That's implanted.
Oh, you think that's just like that's what they were told?
It's the equivalent when we talk about bro science stuff that they have. Yes, they've learned that they need to hit it by 1,000 different angles. But here's some realities that when you're talking on a physiological, an anatomical reaction, your muscle works from insertion to origin, okay?
Yeah.
And it can't work in any other direction. So angles aren't going to make any kind of difference whatsoever between those 2 points.
Angles, probably not. But one thing to think about would be, let's say you're doing a seated row, right? You do a seated row with a straight bar that only allows you to travel through a certain range of motion, and then because the bar hits you at the torso, you can no longer go through a full range of motion as you could with independent handles or like a single, like a dumbbell row or something like that.
Okay.
So that would be a variation, not necessarily an angle. It could be an angle change.
But does it shorten the muscle? So my point is, though,
I'm just talking about what I'm talking about is variations for range of motion.
No, and I get that.
Do you think that would change it because
it would help with the joint structure? But see, that's going to hit stabilization muscles differently. That's going to hit, but it's going to hit different muscles. So that's another reason why I'm saying once you start to figure out, like with my shoulder. Okay, so I have a really bad shoulder. My left shoulder is terrible, and so with it'll just pop out of place. So I have issues with my shoulder that I lose a lot of range of motion. Is that going to be a restrictive thing when I lift? Absolutely, but it doesn't change the fact that my muscles are contracting from one point to another.
I totally agree with you on that. That's
what I'm saying, though. Right, and so if you were to pull the bar up past your chest or your waist, doing a barbell row that you're talking about, you'll have a higher, if you will, flexibility in your shoulder potentially, but it won't change the muscle distance. It'll still contract to a certain point because it can't contract beyond that point.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is,
do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is like it's a difference between a single arm dumbbell row versus a barbell row.
Well, and
there's more range of motion.
They call it.
It's the same muscle contraction, the same point A to point B in origin insertion.
Yes.
And same muscle recruitment.
Yes.
But the range of motion and thus the contraction and the eccentric contraction are more are larger range of motion. Do you think that would make a difference?
To an extent. But not. I mean, technically speaking,
are we splitting hairs?
I think we're splitting hairs at that point. But the reality is, okay. So since you're using something that I think there's been a lot of changes over the years in. We'll use dumbbell rows, bent rows. They don't stretch anymore. Most guys, if you take it, unless it's a trainer that's gone through and studied beyond this, but they want you to not move. In fact, let's change it to cable rows.
Oh, are you saying easier. Like allowing give during the exercise?
Instead of sitting in a position and not moving your waist in a cable roll, let's talk cable rolls because it'll be easier to explain on. So you have your feet out, you have the handles in front of you, and you're leaning out, but you got your back straight.
Yep.
Okay. When you pull it, you don't move anything but your arms, pretty much. Okay. That is not recruiting, and it's not getting the stretch because of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I agree with the stretch. So
because the old school lift of that is to include back extension while you're doing that,
but forward and backwards.
But now the new trainer approach is
isolated.
Very rigid, no back extension,
right.
Neutral spine, that kind of thing.
Yes, and that's why I'm saying that because if you lean forward, you get more of a stretch, and you get more of an actual facilitation of muscle. Mm-hmm. So kind of what you're saying between a barbell and a dumbbell, to an extent. I
like your example. That's a good example.
Well, it's a different in movement, and the whole point is with a barbell. Well, I could break that out. We could actually talk about this in more depth. I
guess
want to.
My point in bringing it up is that it's not 100%. You should just do all of the main key foundational exercises we talk about.
But you could.
You could, yeah, and that would be most effective. But it
would be effective.
But there's still room for and importance in including variations of exercises.
And I agree with that.
Even if they're, you could argue that maybe it's a less superior exercise or something.
Yeah, but let's break this out so that we're answering this question a little bit better. So when you start talking,
and the context she was talking in is for muscle development, by the way.
And I believe that. So when you start talking angles, stances, grips, body position, I don't exactly know what types necessarily is implying.
Like RDL versus sumo versus conventional.
Which is just a stance angles thing.
Yeah.
So in theory, that's just kind of a mix. Okay, so that makes sense. So it's tied together. But when you start doing that, let's talk about sumos to a regular deadlift. Mm-hmm. So the reason why a sumo is superior to some people is a sumo is less damaging to your back. Mm-hmm. It makes it
and it's more favorable for the biomechanics of certain body types.
Absolutely, because of positioning. Yeah,
like if you,
I would say women actually their bodies are structured more for a sumo.
Most of my female clients tend to gravitate or do better with a sumo,
which would make sense because of hip width,
and because even though I'm kind of a normal average height, mm-hmm. but because my body type, my limbs are longer, I perform much better. My leverage is way more powerful with a sumo, and my back is way more stable and protected in a sumo than a conventional. I can do them both, and I do them both.
No, and I get that, and that's the reason why I say that. There's reasons to do a sumo deadlift over a regular deadlift if you have back injuries mm-hmm. or back problems, because it causes less stress on the back. Mm-hmm. If you use a hex bar.
Yeah, or that would be a good example of a variation too.
Which is a good variation for deadlifts because it's made for deadlifts, but and assorted other back related stuff. But because of the angle you have to be in, it actually causes you to have a lot less stress on your back. So they're better for actually being able to complete the exercise if you have restrictions. If you're 100% physically on point, okay, and you have no real injuries and you have no real restrictions, is there a better call between the two, I would lean towards deadlifts, but just regular conventional deadlifts. Not because they're heavier, lighter, anything like that, but it has more muscle recruitment.
Okay.
Through your back, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So is there a reason to change? There can be, but see,
you're talking about very minute details that aren't necessarily that important
when you're basic,
unless for specific individual reasons.
Exactly, and that's the reason why when you began saying that with a beginner you want to hit different angles and stuff. I'm just saying I've heard that, and I was wondering your thoughts on that. And I just see that as a mistake because at that point there's no reason to. When you start off hitting the basic exercises only is going to give you a better all around movement. It's going to give you an easily usable, because most of them are pretty basic. There's no real rotations or weird stances to them. So working through those first, then when you start to see variants where you need to do like hip bridges to get your squat to be better.
Yeah.
At which point,
like we talked about in that episode about priming exercises.
Exactly right. And so when you want to throw those in too, it's to make it so that you can take care of a deviation from the actual movement. Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me huge. When you start hitting angles, it's to fix a problem, in my opinion, if that makes sense. When you start using angles, it's to fix a problem. Mm-hmm. You don't need to use necessarily grips. You don't need to use different stances or anything like that until you're trying to minimize or fix something that's happening on an individual basis. Do I think it needs to be done?
That's what I would say, because it's important to note, like I said, a tall, lanky person is going to just perform a deadlift safer, better, and more effectively in a sumo stance than they would a conventional. So they should alter their grip and their stance and their body positioning based off that switch.
And I agree with that.
So it just really depends on the individual factors. So for Tammy's individual factors, she would just have to assess which angles or positionings or variations of exercises she performs better and more effectively. But then the second part of her question is, should she do compound versus isolated exercises? Are there benefits to isolated exercises? Things like doing, especially for muscle development, doing things like glute kickbacks, calf raises, single leg RDLs. Do those assist in muscle development to the larger versions of those, which would be things like a squat and a larger deadlift? Or are those unnecessary? Those kind of things.
Again, it goes down to recruitment. So let's talk about things that I'm not a big monster believer in. Kickbacks. Kickbacks are, I think, in the majority of the time, are a waste of time. That being said,
I agree.
If you're not getting recruitment correctly, it is a real good
primer.
You use the word primer a lot, and I'm gonna use primer on this, but I'm gonna say it's a something that I would superset. So I would take a kickback. I would get it till I was having lactic acid reactions. Then I would squat. You're going to squat a lot less weight, but you're going to recruit.
Yeah.
That muscle fiber is going to burn out faster, and you're going to have more pressure in it for a volume base. Do I think that's the wisest way to do it? No, but you do that when you have an issue you're trying to deal with.
Yeah, but
calf raises.
I wouldn't even use glute kickback as the I guess you could call it an accessory exercise to a squat or a primer even for that reason. I would do something that makes more sense for biomechanical functions. I mean, realistically, when are you doing glute kickbacks?
Well, it's not necessarily a firing thing, though, dude. So in a case, if you're doing
like that, what I mean is like hip bridge or proper hip extension kettlebell swing versus a glute kickback. Don't you think those would fire better?
Not necessarily.
No,
because you use them for a very specific purpose. Mm-hmm. And doing that purpose is to make it so you have hip mobility in the right way when you're doing your squats.
Yes.
Glute kickbacks would be to hit a specific muscle fiber, not to stop restriction. So the difference between using them would be a kickback or something like under that was to make it so that you're getting more of a reaction in your glutes than you are in your quadriceps when you're doing your squats. And it would make sense if you're doing that because you're not feeling it at all in one area. But
so
again, isolation.
I would use it for isolation. That reason.
Yeah, but again, is there reason for isolation exercises? Yes.
In terms of her context being muscle building.
Yes, and that's the reason why I'm kind of jumping into it at this point. Using isolation exercises I would use for a targeting and then I would use the compound exercises. They call them finisher exercises at this point when I'm talking about the way I am, but because of the nature of it. So let's say bench press. You go in and you lay down and you bench and you feel it in your anterior delt and your triceps, but you don't feel it at all in your chest. If you do flies, and to the point where you're feeling it pretty noticeably, and then you go do your bench press, you're going to feel it automatically in your chest because you burned out all your fibers in the process, and you probably won't feel it almost at all in your anterior delt
groups.
or your because of what you're trying to target. At that point, it's usually a higher, more advanced concept. And that's why you want to start using angles.
But that would be kind of used in those specific scenarios where the person needed that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. Up until the point where the person needs it, unless they're having a restriction. Well, even then, if you even have a restriction, at which point you do a different exercise. Mm-hmm. So because you have a restriction. Like with my shoulder, if I don't start doing a lot of stuff with the rear of my shoulder, I will have more and more problems because it's loose. Mm-hmm. I've got to pull it back into place. And so it's a compensation that I'm doing to make it so that my other exercises aren't getting jacked, if you will. But that's after the fact. To begin with, as a beginner, which Tammy, I know you're not technically a beginner. You may feel like you are, but you've been lifting longer than the average beginner is anyway. But you have to start looking for things that are not effectively working the way that you want. This is part of programming. You look at it and you say, well, you're not targeting this correctly, so let's take a less effective exercise in a leg press. And I'm going to have you do a high leg press, meaning your feet are on the top of the stand instead of the bottom of it. And then I'm going to have you go deep, and that's going to hit more your glutes and your hamstrings than it is your quadriceps because you're not getting that recruitment in your squats. I'm going to still recommend squats being the number one movement, but I'm trying to hit a specific thing, and I may lead with that first.
And the reason we recommend going with the bigger movement is because of the volume and the compound aspect of it will actually elicit more muscle development response for you.
Yeah.
And then you look at, okay, what are my individual needs? Do I need these accessory or additional isolated exercises for specific reasons?
Well, and there's a couple things that I would say that you kind of need to throw in there, like let's talk calf raises since that's on this list. Calf raises, you're not hitting when you're squatting. Your calves don't actually fire when you're doing a squat anyway. I mean, it's not like they don't at all, but they really
stabilization.
Don't. Only stabilization. Yeah. So you're not going to have any muscle recruitment there. So do you have to do calf raises? You have to do some kind of calf raises, or you don't affect them. Mm-hmm. Now understand that when you
but the nature of that muscle is an isolated. There's no compound
isolation, right? Because
calf
the way it
movement.
sits. I mean, it crosses too because it hits your knee. And it attaches below your ankle. But that being said, you're right. It's technically an isolation movement because it's only really hitting your calf. So breaking that down really quick, seated calf raises, because of the angle of your legs, you only hit basically the soleus, which is deep. It's not superficial. What most people perceive as a calf is the gastrocnemius muscle, which is on top of the soleus muscle, and so. When your knee is bent, you don't engage your gastrocnemius almost at all, and when it's straight, you have very little recruitment of your soleus muscle. So you almost have to. And I don't recommend personally. I don't recommend doing soleus work because most people don't need it. But that being said, it varies depending on the person. So again, going back to answer this question correctly, it really depends on your goals and where you're at. So to begin with, I wouldn't worry about it because. Again, what they call as newbie gains, they are almost anybody will have massive improvement right off the bat with initial weight training, and changing from again I know Tammy pretty well, so changing from dumbbells to a barbell type setup is almost going to give you the benefits of a newbie type development just because it's completely change in your exercise routine. So. You're still going to want to do stuff with like biceps. You're still going to want to do stuff with triceps. You'll still want to do stuff with calves. But your main compound movements at this point, will be
superior.
Will be superior overall, without question, because you won't have to worry about the necessity for specifics.
Yeah,
I don't know if I've answered that.
No, I think that's perfect. Just putting an emphasis on the majority of your muscle. Development. If your goal is muscle development, putting your emphasis on, well, for multiple goals, your emphasis should be on compound exercises. Mm-hmm. But there's a place for isolated under certain personal circumstances.
Well, and again, when you're hitting biceps forearms. I almost never train forearms myself, but forearms, calves. Those are all going to be isolation-based exercises anyway. But they're almost finishing, just kind of ending out your workouts anyway, because you've already gone past them. So
Okay. Next question is from Lorena, and she is asking, what are the implications of too little salt or reducing salt intake too quickly?
My great friend from Australia.
Yeah. I was totally going to do an accent right there, and then I realized I would slaughter it, so I am not going to do that.
She wants me to do an accent one of these times, probably,
But
it shall not be today.
Was that just a British
No,
accent?
it was close, but it wasn't.
Let's not try this. We're just going to embarrass ourselves.
I will one day unintentionally fall into it. I play with them many, many, many times.
Well, it's good to hear from her. So to answer this, some of the side effects of, functions and side effects and things like that of sodium. Too little salt or sodium intake is going to impact your thyroid function. If you're, talking about an infant or someone who's pregnant, it's going to impact infant development and brain development. Some side effects of just low sodium intake are going to be actually, ironically, dehydration. A lot of people talk about, salt dehydrates you, but excess salt can do that. But
it would have to be a lot.
Yeah, but the problem is that people have demonized sodium because of some of the research that shows its link to cardiovascular disease and things like that. So when you're talking about sodium, you should be taking in about 1,500 to 2,300 or 2,400 milligrams a day, and you shouldn't really you shouldn't be below that for sure. If you're active, if you're lifting weights, and especially if you're an athlete, your sodium intake should be higher. And some people look at sodium as this bad thing, especially when they're focused on a weight loss goal and they're super fitness oriented, and they're actually it's to their detriment when they lower their salt too low.
Right.
So the symptoms you're going to see are actually going to be dehydration, because electrolytes in general, sodium's an electrolyte. It regulates the balance of hydration within your cells and outside of cells, or intra and extracellular hydration. So if you lack sodium, you're actually you could go into a state, it'd be rare, but people die from this. In fact, someone in Utah died from this a few years ago as a result of a hazing thing. But hyponatremia is when you basically drown your cells because you don't have enough electrolytes present to balance the water intake. And so too little salt can definitely have fatal impacts, or at least very harmful impacts, if not fatal. Things like headaches, dizziness, nausea, typical symptoms of dehydration.
Mm-hmm. That's the biggest part with salt.
Yeah,
is dehydration.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, touch on the electrolyte stuff, because that's kind of important in this.
Yeah, sodium is, as I said, it's an electrolyte. There's multiple electrolytes that serve different functions in your body, but sodium is one of those primary ones. They also are responsible for communicating brain signals for muscle contractions, different functions in the body like that. So you need to make sure you have the right balance of them. But your major electrolytes are sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and then you also have others that people don't talk about a lot, which is chloride, phosphate, bicarbonate, and those are some examples. To touch on the main four in terms of how much you should be getting each day, like I said, sodium would be around 1,500 to 2,300 milligrams per day. Potassium is a little bit more than that. It's not quite double, but it's over that. It's around 3,500 milligrams per day. Calcium is about 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams per day, and magnesium is about a 1-to-2 ratio in orientation to calcium. And we've talked about magnesium in the past. So
we've even talked about the tie-in ratios, because that's actually kind of an important tie-in. I can't remember which one ties the other direction. One of them ties it so that they need.
I get them mixed up.
I want to say it's
got to be
calcium.
Calcium's got to be the higher dose.
Yeah, and I think calcium actually causes the need for magnesium. But anyway, one or the other. I'm not going to make it sound like I knew right off the top of my head, because I don't know the answer to that right off the top of my head. But causes the need for both. That's the reason why they're tied together usually when they're in something to take. So
yeah, you definitely. I mean, those are your kind of the RDAs, the recommended daily allowance for those. nutrients. So just remember that your individual needs might vary. Like someone in my shoes, if I consume 1,500 milligrams of sodium, I'm going to be messed up. Like that's not nearly enough for what I need, for how active I am, for as much as I utilize sodium in my body. I need more of not quite a high performance athlete intake, but I need more special needs when it comes to my electrolytes. So, just know that you're talking about they could be tied, yeah.
Because I almost want to see because I don't know the answer to that.
Well, we can talk about it here in a sec. But yeah, so just know that your individual needs might vary on those, but those are your kind of standard recommendations for intakes on electrolytes. And there are hazards to too much and too little on electrolytes, especially like sodium. So, I mean, I think, has Lorena competed?
She was,
or is she planning on it?
Was working towards it.
So here's
1,000 miles away. Sorry, she was working on it. She was heading towards that, and her phenomenal trainer that she had helped her so dramatically move away from the option of being able to do that she decided to back out. So,
because one thing to think about, one thing to think about is context. Competitors water, carb, and calorie cycle pre-competition.
Yeah.
So meaning that along with water cycling, they're sodium cycling, which means they're down regulating sodium intake to dangerous levels in order to leach out every single drop of moisture out of their body. So when they come on the stage, they're raw and lean.
The thing
and that's dangerous.
And the thing is a lot of that has been proven to be faulty anyway. They've when you're following the competitive world, they've found there's no need to do that most of the time. I was just barely listening to somebody talking about this. In fact,
really?
I want to say it was Lane Norton.
So what was the reasoning behind that?
Because they were trying to get, like you were saying, they were trying to get every ounce of water out, and they don't want to do that.
No, I understand that, but so you're saying it's not effective? I mean, is it safe?
Needed.
No, we know that.
It's not needed.
It's not needed for that aesthetic look?
No, not at all. When they found more recently that's actually something that's kind of a misnomer. They don't need to do that.
Any more details on that? I'm just curious.
I wish I had better information
because I know that a lot of water storage.
Those guys are competitors, and that's the reason why when I was listening to them, they brought it up. I was like, it makes sense to me because a lot of like you were saying, electrolytes, all that kind of stuff, you kind of need in your muscles themselves, and if you're doing it correctly, it should not cause you to have a lesser physique. Even competing.
Interesting.
But I don't have the details on that. That was fairly recent for me.
I'm curious because I've experimented a little bit with it for photos. Now that's also been in relation to carb cycling and carb loading in orientation to those. So with every gram of carbohydrate that you intake, a certain amount of water will be stored. And so if you downregulate your carbohydrate intake, naturally you're going to flush as well, potentially regardless of sodium intake.
Forgive me, I'm doing two things at once, and so I'm falling away from the world.
But, for example, I did a water sodium cycle down, then carb loaded prior to a photo shoot.
Sure.
Without water intake. So I took in a large dose of simple carbohydrates with very little fluid intake to cause glycogen stores to increase in my muscle. And I saw a large impact in terms of keeping my water and salt low, that my skin was a lot tighter and my muscle bellies filled out a lot more from the carbohydrate intake. So I was under the impression that had produced the result that was desired in terms of flushing sodium, decreasing sodium caused me to flush water.
Well, you don't want to be bloated for sure, but bloat's a different thing altogether.
Which excess would cause.
But the whole point is if you actually have a fairly consistent, adequate water supply in your body, you don't have to. Cutting that out, it's not going to affect your fat levels, and it's not going to affect your technically your skin. I mean, hydration will, but you won't have that soft look if you do it right, according to what I was listening to. Now, granted, I don't compete right yet. I was thinking about doing it at one point. I'm nowhere near ready. I've got to lose a lot before that for if I really want to do it. I haven't decided I really want to do it, but and at which point I would test this more. But according to what I was just listening to, and like I said, they were competitors, and they said that actually now granted, were they all bodybuilding competitors? No, some were athletic competitors. I want to say it was TNT. I was listening.
Oh,
to.
okay.
And so it was based on athletics as far as sports athletes, but they compete better with better water. So
Well, yeah.
And Lane was talking about the fact, though, on a bodybuilding level, he was saying it was a similar relationship. And that's the reason why, like I said, I don't want to say that I know what I'm talking about on this, because I don't. But according to what I was just barely listening to, it was in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'd like to listen into that, because that'd be interesting to learn about. But
I'm trying to figure out how this is tied together. That's why I keep finding.
So, last question. Are we, did you want to keep this anonymous?
No.
Or no?
Well, we'll just start talking about it.
Okay.
So the thing is because I think it ties into this. This wasn't Lorena. This is another question.
Different question from a different person.
But it's dealing with constipation. So I'm kind of speculating right now, and because
there's a tie to I always
really
mix it
ready
up.
for
Is
this.
it calcium or vitamin C that causes additional constipation? It's one of those two, but I always mix it.
Constipation can come. Well, I know kidney stones are tied
think
to calcium.
Well, yeah.
And heavily, actually.
So the question is, if constipation comes along with a high protein diet, am I consuming enough water? What could cause this constipation? What should I do if I'm experiencing this? Some things to note while he's looking up to see if there's a micronutritional relation, which there is. I just can't remember.
For sure. I
just can't remember if it's calcium or vitamin C. I always mix those two up when it comes to this. It's one of them. But something to consider is if you're doing a ketogenic diet, a high-fat diet can cause quite a lot of constipation due to just the changes in your stool from such a dramatic change in nutritional intake. That can definitely happen. So if you're consuming a high-fat diet, and I would say a high-fat diet would be once you start going past around 30%, then you're starting to get more towards like a moderate or high-fat diet. 30% is a pretty, I think it's about 35% is kind of that recommended cap of intake on dietary fat, because you need fats. So I would just call that kind of a normal intake. So once you're past that, then you're probably into that high fat amount. Then you're going to start to you probably see some changes in your stools. Another thing to think about is really, are you just getting enough fiber? You need about 38 grams a day. I mean, men and women, it's a little different, but
calcium.
That's what I would shoot for. It's calcium?
Well, okay, so I'm looking at I'm actually looking on WebMD, just so you guys know, I'm not hiding this. Antacid containing calcium or aluminum will actually cause constipation, is one of the things. I'm not going to read that because that will make it sound something different than I want it to be. Keep talking about your thing, and I'll just voice
fiber. Making sure that you're having enough adequate dietary fiber intake, around 36, 38 grams.
Painkillers can cause constipation. It says stress. I already knew active thyroid, so thyroid stuff will cause it.
But it's not vitamin C. It's the calcium.
Vitamin C hasn't been mentioned at all, but calcium is definitely mentioned. A lot of dairy products should
cause it.
Eating disorders overall. So a lot of metabolic damage type stuff we've talked about would do it.
Yeah.
Then, not being active enough, because that actually causes your intestinal tract to function correctly. I know that from a massage therapy basis. Am I too quiet?
Your face is down, so I thought
sorry.
You might be.
I'll move a little closer.
So,
not enough water or fiber. Eating fruits. Let's talk about where you're going, since I'm cutting that off with stuff you've kind of covered. So eating fruits, fiber-based stuff, drinking an adequate amount of water. So yeah, you're probably not consuming enough water to answer that part of that question.
So those are some ways that you can increase more consistent, softer stools and decrease constipation. But in relation to your question about high protein can increase constipation. It just depends on those other factors as well. I mean, defining high protein, I don't know exactly what you mean by a high protein diet in terms of what you're consuming.
Well, that's true
I would consider high protein anything past 1.2 grams per pound per day. So if you're consuming, depending on your weight, if you're consuming, take your weight times 1.2, and if you're eating more than that many grams of protein per day, then you could be getting to the higher protein intake that might not be necessary.
Right.
And that could cause constipation. But it really is an orientation to these other factors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. And like I said, I would lean towards eating fiber. I'd drink a lot of water.
And by a lot of water, I would personally say take your weight, again, times that by 0.8, and that remaining number is your fluid ounce of intake of water per day.
And I guess the next question is if you're potentially lactose intolerant, because that'll cause it too, from what I understand.
That's a good point.
And so related
it could be gut flora related too.
It could very well be gut flora related. So
which is the live culture bacteria that protects and aids you in digestion and absorption. Mm-hmm. It's huge for immune function as well. So your constipation may be an inflammatory response related to a gut flora issue. So,
and that would make sense.
So you may,
even though we're not reading that,
look at
that
your
makes sense
diet.
for sure.
Look at what you're consuming to see if there's any. Are you over consuming on something? Are you exploiting something too much that you could be depleting certain enzymes? Are you under eating on specific nutrients that you should incorporate? Try to balance that out and take it one factor at a time. Change one thing at a time for a week or so and see if it makes it better or worse. I was thinking that for another time.
Well, I think we already covered that a little bit too. Okay. So anyway, yeah. So hopefully that helps on that as well. I was thinking about it and I was like, I don't have an appropriate answer. That's why I started to research that a little bit while I was sitting here.
But I would say start with that. So check your fat intake, check your protein intake.
I would check your salt.
Yep.
That's the reason why I was kind of tying that in.
And calcium?
No, well, calcium too. But I'm saying I would check your salt levels because I think I actually suspect, my guess is,
if she's dehydrated,
that you're having dehydration problems, which if you don't have a lack of salt, granted, you don't want to be excessive about that either, but don't be afraid of salt. It's not your enemy necessarily. So I would actually add salt into this a little bit and look at it from a perspective of dehydration, because a lot of times dehydration, in my opinion, is a lot of times what causes people to get backed up, if you will. And
I don't think people realize how important hydration is and how much you actually do need to consume. Now, there are people that consume to excess for sure,
right,
but
right, for sure.
Hydration isn't just water. Hydration is water, it's blood sugar, it's electrolyte balance, it's in relation to your activity, it's sweat, respiration. Well, it's all that's all tied together.
Yeah,
and people tend to underhydrate.
The reality is dehydration comes down to it is water based, but the fact that all these other factors play into the hydration aspects. So when Taylor's saying that,
don't just go chug a gallon of water. You need to look at these other things too.
Well, and we've talked about it multiple times in the stuff that we've talked about in the past, that you got to realize that if you're flushing water all the time when you're running, let's take the marathon. When we were talking marathons last time, the whole deal with you run and you drink a whole ton of water, what ends up happening is you flush out all the electrolytes. And so at that point, you start to dehydrate because you have nothing that's absorbing and holding water in your system. Mm-hmm. So it just goes through your system. Go through your different aspects. You go out as a waste.
Especially when you're an endurance athlete, you can go hyponatremic way more
fast.
likely.
Way fast.
And so that's why things like Gatorade and stuff, they're fortified with electrolytes.
I just wish they had less sugar.
Yeah, because for that reason,
mm-hmm.
it replaces nutrients that you need that water just can't by itself.
Right.
But you need all of it.
Yep. So I would say to kind of combination that's that hopefully answers that quite a bit. But I think those two are actually pretty well in conjunction. That's why we just mixed them, even though I'm covering my face with my hand.
Cool. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think we're good.
Awesome.
I think we'll call that. Just for the record, it is the 4th of July today. This will not be aired today. So we have come out of our way on a holiday to say hi to you people. And this is in the United States, plainly. So, Lorena, you guys do not have the 4th of July there.
And also,
well, you do, but you don't have it in the holiday sense.
Yeah. They probably have...
another day.
Yes. So, anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we love you guys. We hope you have a great holiday if you're in the United States. And, well, yeah, that's true.
Because, like I said, this is in the future.
Whatever, man. Okay, we'll talk to you later.
Peace.
Peace. Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Shane and I hope you learned something new and exciting today about your own health and fitness. Head over to metabolicradio.com. There you'll find our bios and our results-driven programs that are designed to help teach you everything you need to know when it comes to getting real permanent results. You can also sign up for our newsletter to get free weekly updates. To chat with Shane or I, just email us at taylor@metabolicradio.com or shane@metabolicradio.com. We would love to hear from you. You can also join the conversation on Facebook. Just go to facebook.com and search for Metabolic Radio Private Forum. There you can request to join the group. We would love to add you to the conversation and answer your questions on the show. And hey, if you like our podcast, please help us grow our community by leaving us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. We would really appreciate your help. Thanks again so much for all your support and your listenership. Now go out there and spread the good word of fitness.